Begin this session where I began the last one. If God can save any person, He can save any church. And that is the philosophy that I bring to you today that I would say is rooted in theological conviction. I have been working with my childhood church in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I grew up off 28th Avenue North. The church is off 22nd Avenue North. And it's in an urban setting. And it's been hard to watch. It's been difficult to see them decline. I knew that there was a problem when they invited me back to one of their dinners together. And, you know, I knew that the church was small. I knew that they were struggling. But they pulled out albums from the heyday of the church. And they started showing me pictures of myself when I was 8 years old. And my dad was the pastor. Now, I love my father, but if that's your heyday, is Tom Rayner's tenure, I don't know what to say about that. They have been in decline for many years. They are working to get out of it. Can God save Azalea Baptist Church? Yes. Yes. Can they be revitalized? Absolutely. If God can save any person, He can save any church. Now, when we talk about growing a church, what is church growth? I am going to give you 5 best practices for church revitalization right now. So this is kind of a, hey, what should I be doing right now? But I at least want to get this out of the way. You know, what is church growth? Well, we often talk about numerical growth. I think that's important. I think the pendulum swung too far with the church growth movement, and then it swung back too far the other way, where we just kind of didn't talk about numerical growth. That's part of it. Numerical growth is part of it. Spiritual maturation is part of it. We talk about church growth. We hope our people grow in Christ. Community influence is part of church growth. Missiological sending. I hope you are sending people out, if not for short-term mission trips, as what we would call career missionaries. I think cultural bridge building is part of church growth, and being, an institution, if you will, in the community that helps bridge divides. There's lots of ways to talk about church growth. I am mainly going to focus this session on numerical growth, with the understanding that you understand that I know that it's much broader than that. But often when people come to us at Church Answers and they say, hey, can you help my church grow? I know what they mean. They often mean we have declined and we need to get more people here. So that's going to be the focus of what I'm going to tell you in this session. And I could do any number of sessions on any number of those topics around what church growth really is. But there's 4 ways that your church grows numerically. Just 4. We're talking about statistics, right? Just the raw numbers. We were at 100, now we're at 150. That's pretty good growth. How did that happen? There's 4 main ways your church grows numerically. The first is arguably the most important. Conversion growth. This is where somebody comes to Christ through the ministry of your church. Somebody from your church shares the gospel with them. It's a neighbor, it's a friend, a coworker, a family member. They come to faith in Jesus, they profess faith, they follow in baptism. We often measure in baptisms in our tribe, that is Southern Baptist. No, not everybody here is Southern Baptist, but a lot of you are. And so we often measure in baptisms, but you could measure just the number of people that have professed faith in Christ, and then they're assimilated into the body. Now, that's the best kind of growth. That's what most churches should be focusing on. That's not the way. If you find a growing church, that's not the way most churches are growing. More on that in a moment. But that is the goal. Then there is transfer growth. Now, I am going to differentiate transfer growth from demographic growth, and this is kind of a new way of thinking about these definitions. But transfer growth is, I was at this church in my community, and I moved down the road 2 miles. Same community. That's what I'm going to call transfer growth, is, I did not move. I'm not in a new community. I just went to a different church in the same community. Demographic growth is I've moved from, in our case in Florida, it's Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. And anytime I meet somebody new, I'll just ask them, California or New York, and they laugh. They laugh because they know what that means. I mean, I know why people are moving to our community. Florida is changing quite rapidly. People are leaving blue states, and they're coming to Florida. Now, you can think whatever you want to about that, but that's what's happening. And so we have a lot of demographic growth. Now, if the person from California joins my church, they may transfer their letter, as we say, but that's not really transfer growth. They moved across the country. So I want to differentiate between demographic growth, which is I'm a new resident in the community, from transfer growth. By the way, if you are not focusing on new people to the community, what on earth are you doing? Forgive me for being so crass, but there should be hyper competition for I'm a tithing believer who loves Jesus and is ready to share my faith. If that person moves to your community, you should be all over that person to join your church because they're gonna join somewhere. Why not your church? Now, what I don't want is a lot of church hopping. That's transfer growth. But demographic growth, if they're new to the community, you should be doing new resident ministry, finding out who they are, and definitely going after them. And then, skipped it, but biological growth, that's people in your church having children, and those children being brought to faith as they grow up in the church. Now, maybe I'm missing one. Maybe after this session or during the Q&A, you can say, I've got a 5th one to add. That's fine. But really, there are just 4 main ways to grow your church numerically. I would argue, number 1, number 3, and number 4 are the best ways. You're always going to have some transfer growth, but we should minimize transfer growth while we maximize conversion growth, hopefully maximize biological growth and demographic growth. Now, this is a question that I often get, and maybe one you're asking of yourself. Why is my church not growing? Why is my church not growing? I did a consult with a church in the Midwest. This was a few years ago at this point, but I like telling this story. So they came to me, and this is the case with a lot of churches. Hey, we've declined, we need help. There's fewer people in our worship space. Okay, well, why don't you guys send me your numbers? Just send me what you have. And I said, send me, and in this particular case, if I remember right, I said, send me as far back as you got. I think it was 30 years. They sent me 30 years worth of data, which was great. So I just plotted it all out. I started it the first year that they gave me, and then 30 years worth of data forward. And I just had there was a line, and it was a line that went straight down. And so I came back to them, and I said, okay, here's the deal. You've lost 8 people per year on average for 30 years. There's been no major split, no major catalyst. It's just a slow erosion, which is the case of a lot of churches. And you don't notice 8 people per year each year, but then 30 years later, you wake up and you go, there are less people here. Well, they had declined from 400 to 160. That was the 30 years times 8 people per year. And if you did have 400 and now you got 160, that's kind of when you start to notice. And so they called me, and I charted this whole out, and I sat down with their leadership team, and they did not believe me. They wanted to blame their new young pastor. And I had to inform them that their young pastor was in his 20s. I was like, this problem is older than he is. He's not your issue. And then one lady spoke up and said, well, I don't like your chart. I don't think those are real numbers. And I said, well, if they're not real numbers, they're the ones you sent me. These are your numbers. Well, they're not correct. Well, then why did you send them to me? Well, they were correct, and they were just in a denial phase. How does this happen? We all feel this, right? I know I feel this. I've been in churches where my first full-time church had gone through 4 splits before I got there. And so it was down to 80 people. I mean, who hires at that point I was 26, who hires a 26-year-old pastor who, at that point I had read through the whole Bible, if you listen to the first session. I felt convicted, and I said, if I'm a pastor, I better read the whole Bible. But I didn't have much experience. Well, they hire me, and that's the kind of church that hires a 26-year-old. By the way, I just got married 2 weeks prior, and my wife's 5 years younger than me, so she was 21. So they could not wrap their minds around the fact that the pastor's wife was 21 years old. But we got through it. It ended up being a really good church in Indiana. I had a good time with them. So, but how does it happen? Okay, so you have a split, or you have a catalyst, or you have something that happens. I mean, you kind of point to a specific moment, and okay, that's what happened. Well, how does it happen in a lot of churches where you just wake up one morning and you go, man, we're smaller? Well, here's how it happens. For every 100 people in your church, in attendance on a Sunday morning, for every 100 in attendance on average in your church, here's what you're going to lose each year. Now, these are just statistics. If you look at the death rate, if you look at the mobility rate, and if you look at how often people transfer to another church in the community, you see those numbers. So on average, again, if you are an older church, on average, you're going to lose more to death. If you're in a less mobile community, obviously it would be less to moving. So these are national averages. But every year, you're going to lose 1% to death, 9% to moving, 7% that transfer to another church, and then you're going to lose 15% to declining attendance frequency. Now, with those first 3, they're gone. They've left. The last one, people are still there. They're just not coming as often. Now, let me walk you through this. So you lose about a third of your church every year. So if you're holding your own in attendance, you're actually drawing in a third new people. So keep that in mind. Sometimes when you're treading water, you want to keep growing, of course, but sometimes treading water isn't all that bad because you keep bringing in new people. But I want to talk about this attendance frequency issue, and it's something we've talked about at Church Answers, and so I won't camp here too long. We've all been awake now for a little while. I know it's getting late in the day, but let's do some math. Let's have fun here. You have 400 people that come on average 4 to 4 weeks. What's your average weekly attendance? Nobody passed calculus in this room. 400. It's not a trick question. 400 people come in 4 out of 4 weeks, which is the way it used to be, right? You would average 400 people on a Sunday morning. But now people come how often? If they're active. Every other week. It used to be active people would come 3 times a week. But now, some researchers even say active is like once a month, which is ridiculous. But let's just say most of your people are coming every other week, just so you know. That same 400 people coming every other week. What's your average weekly attendance now? 200. You're half the size on a Sunday morning, and you haven't lost anybody. This is what you're feeling, is people not coming as often. Now, they still call you for counseling. They still want you there when they're in the hospital. They still expect you to do weddings and funerals. But you show up on a Sunday morning, and it's like, well, where is everybody? And you just want to say, well, you guys are coming every other week now instead of every week. So we're half the size, even though you're all still here. And well, where's Joe? Well, he was here last week. Well, where's Sue? Well, she was here 2 weeks ago. This is what's happening in churches. Now, I don't want to be a legalist and say everyone needs to be there every week, but I'll just say I think everyone needs to be there every week. This is good for discipleship. This is good for their souls. This is like, you need this. I need it. So I don't want to come to this from a place of legalism, but from a place of spiritual health. It's good that you would be in the fellowship of the saints. So you're losing roughly 15% to declining attendance frequency. They're not coming as often. So These are the issues. How do you solve them? First, you've got to be good at hospitality. You've got to be good at hospitality. Make a splash with greater hospitality and first impressions ministry. So let's camp here. I'm going to give you 5 ideas, 5 big ideas. Have you noticed how that the service industry is struggling today? That you just don't get good service anymore. Now, I'm not going to blame the workers because a lot of them are working like 2 shifts every day. They're spread very thin. They're exhausted. I mean, if you work in the service industry, this is a very hard place to be. And you can just barely get your job done now, much less provide hospitable service. And so good hospitality, often taken for granted and in very much short supply now. So if the church can show hospitality, you can really stand out from the world. I believe that hospitality is one of the most underrated spiritual gifts. We often think of hospitality as we're having a meal, let's make sure that the tables look nice and that people feel welcome. And that needs to happen. Hear me out. But hospitality is much bigger than that. Your first impressions ministry, sometimes is what it's called. It's much bigger than that. I do want to take you to a couple of passages, so I'll bring you to 1 Peter chapter 4, beginning in verse 7. And I'm preaching through the book of Revelation verse by verse to my church. You can pray for me. I don't know why I know why I've decided to do this, because everyone kept asking me, you need to preach through Revelation. I had like 30 people come up to me independent of each other. I said, fine, I'll give in, I'll do it. And so I'm, Lord, please return so I don't have to finish this series. It's driving me crazy. So the end of days is very much on my mind. So I take you to 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7. The end of the world is coming soon. That'll get your attention. Therefore, here's what you are to do. Be earnest and disciplined in your prayers. Most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other, for love covers a multitude of sins. Cheerfully share your home with those who need a meal or a place to stay. God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to serve one another. This is a passage on hospitality. I mean, let's think about the hermeneutic here. The world is ending. Be hospitable. Now that's not what I was expecting. That's not what I expect Peter to write. Pray, show love, and be hospitable. If you believe that Christ is returning and you believe that the end is near, what's the most important spiritual gift? Hospitality. By the way, God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. The implication of this passage is that hospitality is actually a part of every spiritual gift, that we should all be doing this. I think that this is one of the most underrated ministries in the church. If you look at a list of qualifications of pastors, we often go to able to teach and lead and all this stuff, but what's also included in that list? A willingness to open up your home. And so if you are unwilling to open your home and to show hospitality, you are disqualified for ministry in the same way as if you can't teach the Bible properly. That's how important this is. Hospitality is greatly underrated. Romans 12:13. Always be eager to practice hospitality. You want to reach people, or at bare minimum, just keep people who show up on your campus. You've got to be good at it. Well, how do you get people to serve on your first impressions team? Let me just share with you how one of our team members does this. She leads our first impressions ministry. Layla is her name, and I love what Layla does. She has a lanyard already pre-printed together, and she will identify people that she believes would be wonderful people in her ministry. And she goes up to them, and she just puts the lanyard on them and says, welcome to the First Impressions team. Here is your door. Here is your assignment. She has yet to have anyone turn her down. It's fascinating to me. So we make it an important part of our church ministry, and we like to identify people who we think will do a good job and just go tell them, here is your job. By the way, how do you increase attendance frequency in your church? Give everyone a job. We need you here every week at this door doing this thing. And if you're not here, we're really going to miss you because no one's going to get greeted through this door. One of the best ways to increase attendance frequency in your church is just to give as many people as you can a job and tell them that I expect you to be here. By the way, people love that. Someone comes to you and says, man, I need you here every week. I think you're good at this. I think you can do this. I believe in you. Our church needs you to do this. I mean, it's like, oh, yeah, I'm in. Okay, thank you. We've got to be more forward about the ask. I learned this in the corporate world, and this is not biblical, but I'm just going to share it with you anyway because it's stuck with me. You don't get unless you ask. Well, where are my volunteers? Well, have you asked them? And I'm not just saying like in a room like this, hey guys, we need you to help with the children's ministry. Nobody signs up for that. Come on, you ask everyone, you ask nobody. Go into somebody individually and making the ask. You want to build your hospitality ministry, your first impressions ministry, that's the way to do it. So don't cut resources here. I've heard of churches that like, well, let's save money, let's cut the coffee budget. That's stupid. Everyone, like, if they're used, like, we serve coffee every Sunday morning because people like coffee. And you just cut it. What you're telling people is, you know, we really just don't want to be nice to you. And it's not a good thing to be cutting the hospitality ministry. Don't forget about hospitality online. I've mentioned this on the podcast. I'll tell you in case you don't know. Google has a system to where there's digital real estate associated with every address, business, church, whatever. So here at this church, Lebanon, there's an actual address, and Google has an association with that address. If you haven't claimed your address, posted pictures of your church, made sure that you've updated your hours. There's a business section of Google where you do all that. If you haven't done it, guess what? Your church isn't coming up in searches. When people search church near me, which is the most common search, if you haven't done your work from the Google end, it's not going to reward you. So you need to make sure that you've posted pictures of who you are. And don't post pictures of an empty sanctuary. Why do churches do that? Like, nobody's here, so we don't want you here either. Like, I don't know why. Like, show actual pictures of your people having fun and laughing. You know, show people actually at church. During the worship experience, make sure you tell guests very clearly how to get connected, whatever that is. By the way, hospitable churches have hospitable pastors. You yourself, evangelistic churches have evangelistic pastors. You yourself have to be showing hospitality and leading in this effort. I start here because I believe that it is often missed in so many churches. And if you are at a church that is of normative size, I'm about to tell you something very hard, but it's true. You have to do hospitality better than the larger church. The smaller churches have to be better. Here's why. I am a big Tampa Bay Rays fan. We have started the year quite well. We are 20-3. We will not talk about the Lightning and the debacle that we just experienced with the Leafs. Can't believe that we blew a 4-1 lead. For those of you who follow hockey, it's Stanley Cup time. But at least to have the Tampa Bay Rays, and they're doing really well, and attendance is up. Looks like we might be building a new ballpark. I'm very happy. Go to a game, there's 20 to 25,000 people there. I walk into Tropicana Field. I'm there all the time because tickets are like $10 a piece. If you're like, how do you go to Major League games? Well, it's the Rays, okay? They're cheap. So I walk into Tropicana Field. I don't expect people to go, Sam, hey man, how's it going? Come on over here. Let me get you a cup of coffee. No, there's so many people there that I know that I'm going to be a bit anonymous. You walk into a giant church with a bunch of people, same thing. You expect a level of anonymity. But you walk into a room with 10 people and you sit down and nobody says anything to you, it's weird. It's awkward. You walk into a church of 50 people and you get the side glances, like, oh, is he new? Is she new? It's weird. You're pushing people away. If you are at a smaller church, it's unfair, but it's true. You have to be better at hospitality than the larger church. So that's a good way to make a splash. Secondly, you've got to get the attention of the neighborhood. And I'm going to tell you how to do this. One of my favorite ways to do this is what we call neighbor bags, putting something tangible into the hands of your people. So the more clever, the better. So one of the things that we've done is on a Sunday morning, I will stand in front of, at the end of the service, I'll stand in front of everybody and I'll have one of the bags. And I'll say, all right, guys, in the commons area at the information desk, we've got these bags. And it's May, so, or April now, but let's just say it's May. Summer's here. We got sunscreen, really nice sunscreen. It's a gift to your neighbors. So take one or two or three of these bags. Oh, by the way, it's got information about VBS that's coming up. So when you bring this bag, just, take it to your neighbor. It's from our church. Hey, don't forget to wear sunscreen because it's Florida. And invite them to Vacation Bible School. There's information in there about how to register. So they take that back home. We've done chocolate. We like to do chocolate in February because that's Super Bowl. So we invite people to Super Bowl Sunday. That's a great day to invite people to church, by the way, because everyone's in town and they're not doing anything that morning. So figure out those days that really work. So Super Bowl Sunday, it's chocolate. This time of year, we'll do sunscreen. One year for St. Patrick's Day, someone came up with the idea of the little boxes of Lucky Charms. This little syrup. Anyway, we took those to our neighbors and we just said, hey, we're lucky to be your neighbor. Have some, and it's clever. And people laugh and like, okay, ha. And then they're like, okay, they got a little box of Lucky Charms. You will be remembered for that, okay? It's a great way to get the attention of the neighborhood. And all that you're doing, you're going, all of the people in your church is like, let's go door to door. And it's like, well, we are doing that. And here's how we're going to do that. And you just go and you bring gifts. And so we'll teach our people. Sometimes we do it in mass and we hit the neighborhood around the church. Sometimes we do it just with, handing these bags out. Here's the thing. They'll take these bags and they'll put them on their kitchen counter. They'll get to Tuesday and it's still there and they have this guilt, setting in. Like, I took this bag from the church. It's got chocolate in there. I can eat the chocolate myself. And then, I may get sick because the Lord is judging me because this is supposed to go to my neighbor. And so give people something tangible. Put in their hands, they take it home, and then they know that, and it's already made for them. So we have a whole group of, it's mainly women, but we have a whole group of people that make the bags. And so all that you got to do is just take the bag home and then use it to invite people to church. And it's a lot of fun because you get to go bring a gift to somebody. So that's part of our budget is these neighbor bags. And you can put any number of things in there. Let me just say this. What if you had a 10% success rate with these bags? For every 100 that you did, every homes that you went, 10 families showed up at your church. That's about what we see is a 5 to 10% success rate. Because often people are going to others that they know. These are coworkers, these are friends. There's lots of other ways to get the attention of the neighborhood. One of my favorite things that we do is we sponsor local leagues, sports leagues, but we only do that if a member of our church is a coach. So if you coach in a league, mainly kids leagues or church softball, stuff like that, we'll sponsor that team. But it's got to be an approved member of our church because, not everyone who may coach may give a good vibe about your church. So we got to make sure that we approve who these coaches are. We've done July 4th block parties. We've served single parents through the school systems. We've done prayer walking emphases. We open our facility to other nonprofits, particularly other school systems to use. There's plenty of ways to get the attention of the neighborhood. I'll give you that one. Neighbor bags work really, really well. So, get the attention of the neighborhood. Thirdly, we talk a lot about this at Church Answers. I won't camp here too long, but prepare for a surge of opportunities with church fostering and church adoption. Let me give you some more stats. You correctly identified in the first session that the median church size in the United States is 65 people. That's correct. 20 years ago, it was 137. So the median size of a church is getting much smaller, and that's of concern to me. But what I believe we're experiencing is a crisis of the aging of pastors. So the pastor median age in 1992 was 44. I mean, I'm 43. Like, I would have been normal in 1992. Now I'm like the young pastor. I'm like, I'm not young. But in 2017, we're at 54. Today, we're at 57. Now, hear me out. There's nothing wrong with being older and being a pastor. In fact, there's a lot of benefit to having 30 years of experience. I feel like at my age, I am a much better pastor than I was in my 20s. Like, it's night and day. And I'm sure when I'm 60, I will feel the same way about 43-year-old Sam. So there is nothing wrong with being older and being in the pastorate. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that the median age of a pastor is, some even count 59 or 60, depending on which tribes you include. The median age of a person in the United States is 38. So there's this huge discrepancy, and this problem is getting worse. What this is saying is that there's nobody to replace these pastors. So yes, I'm concerned about a church of 65 that was once a church of 130. But the real crisis that nobody is talking about is there's nobody to lead these churches. And it is of great concern to me. And what's going to happen? What's going to happen is you're going to get a church of 70, 80, or 90, which is a pretty decent-sized church. They're not going to be able to find a pastor, and so they're just going to merge with another church. We call that adoption. And it won't be strategic. It'll just be out of necessity. So there's going to be a huge need for fostering, which is helping another church, and then church adoption, which is bringing another church into the family. And this is not going to be a strategic choice. It will be a choice that is forced, I believe, not necessarily because of the size of the church, but more because we don't have anyone to lead us. So be prepared for more of that. And if you want to solve the problem in your church, start training up people underneath you. Fourth, another best practice to be doing right now. A messy group is better than no group, and your new members classes are a must. So, we do a new members class about once a month, and it's on a Sunday evening. We provide dinner. Here's a little secret that I found with new members classes. We used to do lunch on Sunday after church. When we started gearing our ministries towards young families, we found that that's nap time. And so lunch on Sundays still may work, and you still may want to do them, but it's going to be tougher to draw in young families to your new members classes. So now we do them. I thought it was going to be a bust. My executive pastor was like, and he's got young kids, he was just like, man, you do this on Sunday night, you're going to have a lot more people. I'm like, okay, we'll try it. We're not turning back. Like Sunday at 5 p.m. with dinner and childcare, don't forget to provide childcare, we have found is a great way to do our new members classes. But I also don't want to neglect groups. You are 5 times more likely to keep people in your church after 5 years if they are involved in a group. If they come to worship only, they're 5 times more likely to leave your church, even if they're faithful in worship. So getting in a group is critically important. Now, I'm going to say this in all love because I think Sunday school is the best. If you can have an open group connected to a worship service that's ongoing with the intent of multiplying, it doesn't get any better than that. I'm a big fan of Sunday school. Here's reality. Younger people don't come to Sunday school classes. You go to them and say, hey, you need to be in a group. Like, cool, tell me about your groups. Well, here's a classroom, here's the people, here's your teacher. Okay, well, how long does this group last? And you look at them and you go, forever. You mean I'm going to be in this room with this group of people until I die? I said, let me show you. I've got some classes. They've been together for 60 years. Yeah, it's going to be until you die. When I was at First Baptist Church, Murray, Kentucky, there was a 90-plus-year-old class. And the only way you got into that old man's class is when you hit 90 years old. And, this was the class that when I interviewed, I'll never forget one of them. He looked at me and goes, "Preacher, what cuss word did Jesus use when he cussed the fig tree?" You're like, he didn't cuss. He cursed. Anyway, never mind. He knew what he was doing. It's hard. I love Sunday school. And if you can get people in Sunday school and your church does it well, awesome. I think it's great. The reality is people are attracted to some different things now. Groups that meet for 10 weeks, or we're going to meet in the spring and the fall. My wife teaches home groups. She has mothers who are stay-at-home moms. They come over Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I get kicked out of the house. So all these women with their children, they meet with their children, can come into my home. And, we've got all sorts of different groups. We started doing Wednesday night groups. I thought they would fail because I'm like, who comes to church on Sunday morning worship and then goes to a group on Wednesday nights? But that worked. I was wrong about that too. Again, my executive pastor's idea. So we've got all different kinds of groups. My wife's groups, they do podcasts, so that the content is just listen to the podcast that we're going to talk about it. Obviously approved, and the content is something that is biblically based. But there's all sorts of different ways to do groups. I would just say this: getting people in a group is much better than not. People tend to give more, a lot more when they're in groups, and people tend to stick in your church. So we've focused on just providing a variety of groups. Still do classic Sunday school and Sunday mornings, of course, but we now have Wednesday night groups, home groups, all different kinds of content, groups that meet in the spring and the fall, some that are ongoing. A messy group is better than no group. Get your people involved in groups. Guess what? Help solve the attendance frequency problem. The people that come to groups tend to come to church more often. And then lastly, and this is maybe more spiritual than practical, but I still think it's got a practicality to it. Please be an optimist when leading your church. Please. Pessimists are not leaders. If you are constantly cynical and skeptical and thinking the worst, you're not taking people to a better place, which is a good definition of leadership. What do leaders do? They take people to a better place. Pessimists can't be leaders because they assume the worst. So, I am an eternal optimist. I believe that God will save people. I believe that Jesus will return. I believe this kingdom that is already here but not yet completed will be completed. I believe in the last couple chapters of Revelation that shows King Jesus victorious. I understand times are hard. I understand that some of you may be in some very difficult churches. I realize that some of you have experienced some extraordinarily harsh things in churches. I have too. But I just look to my King and I say he wins. And so, why would you be a pessimist and be a church leader? That's an oxymoron. The most lethal attitude for a Christian and the most lethal attitude for a church is I can't. And here's reasons why I can't. You can always come up with reasons why you can't do something. But the most contagious and healthy attitude that you can have in a church is God can. And I'll leave you with that. If we're going to lead our churches to be revitalized, if we're going to lead our churches to a better place, I've hopefully given you a few practical nuggets that you can implement at your churches. But let's do so with optimism and a spirit of victory. Not that we would do it, but that Christ already has. And you can lead knowing that Jesus will save people.